Thank you for joining us on the program You and the Law right here on OGTV. My name is Miriam Usman. This is where we bring you various societal matters and the stand of the law, of course, in Nigeria. The program continues after this break. Please stay with us. Welcome back. If you're just tuning in, it is You and the Law on OGTV. Now, before we get into the program proper, let me take you through some preambles on what we will be discussing, after which I will be introducing our guest on the program. Buying land in Nigeria is one of the common property law transactions we have in the country. It is administered by various legislations depending on the jurisdiction in Nigeria. Conveyancing, as it is known, is the process by which ownership is transferred from the seller down to the buyer, and this could include a residential or commercial land transactions. No doubt, we are taking a close look at buying land in Nigeria and the legal requirement. Of course, you must have experienced some of the matters that comes with acquiring a landed property in Nigeria. To take us further on this conversation today, I am being joined by Nasiru Moshood on the program, and he will take us through what we are discussing on the program today. Welcome to the program.
It is my pleasure.
Yes. Let's just start our conversation by talking about or trying to create a basis or foundation for our topic today: buying or acquiring a landed property in Nigeria. When your clients approach you in the case of trying to get this land, what do you get started with as a legal practitioner? What are those things you look out for? How do you start?
Okay, thank you very much for the question. To start with, every transaction, be it land or any other matters, requires legal mechanisms set out by the legislation. So the land is not different. Now, going to the question proper, the determinant factor that one needs to put into consideration in investing his money into the land or real estate is for the person to first of all consider his budget and the location where he wants his land to situate. Afterwards, the prospecting buyer needs to engage professionals. It might be a lawyer or some other professionals. We have some broader professions like the real estate valuers and others. They should engage them to conduct what we call due diligence. Due diligence entails trying to find out whether the land that the prospecting buyer is interested in is genuine, whether the seller actually has better title to sell it, to confirm whether the land is not even under acquisition of government, and so many other things that need to be done. So it is only when this is done that we can now recommend to the prospecting buyer that now you have a green light to invest your money on it.
So what are all of the cases where this person buying the land wants this particular land, say for some reasons, either the proximity to the place he or she lives and wants this land by all means, and probably has done one or two arrangements with the seller? Does the person also need to, bring in a legal practitioner to also ascertain all of this?
Now, The issue at hand is not about whether I want it by all means. In an attempt to be desperate to acquire a land, you know, oftentimes the prospecting buyer usually make mistake. I will start an example. The land that the prospecting buyer, for instance, is interested in falls under government acquisition. In such a situation, if the prospective buyer engages the professionals to do due diligence, they would have informed him. His investment is at stake here. There is little risk by the prospecting buyer. Is the one to collect the money. And don't let us forget that in our society, the current trend is the issue of land grabbing,
yes.
the 419s and all that. So individual needs to be very careful. When you want to invest in a land transaction or a land matter, we need to be very patient. It involves so many procedures that we don't need to follow.
You know, I was conversing with someone a few days ago, and he mentioned that when he tried to get a particular land somewhere close to his area there, he took up to 5 different lawyers to the location. And I was wondering, why would anyone go to the extent of hiring 5 lawyers just to come check, do survey, let me know all of this? And something came to my mind. Is it really about the investment the person wants to put there? Or does it have to be something does it have to be a very big land for someone to take such necessary steps? Or you can do it as long as you are getting a land? You know, you could take 50 by 50 now as a landed property. Someone else wants something 200, 300, 100,000 acres of land. Is it this aspect of trying to make everything necessarily in place? Does it have to be with when you have to do with bigger lands or bigger investments before you have to employ the service of a legal practitioner?
Yes, for the purpose of protecting the interests of the prospecting buyer. That's why we advise, as a legal practitioner, we advise prospecting buyer to engage legal practitioners, because we are the one dealing more, aside the fact that the existing land legislation stipulates that such transaction, if it's to be executed, the deed must be prepared by a legal practitioner. Aside express provision of the law, we also try as much as possible to reach out to the prospecting buyer so as to protect their investment. What do I mean by that? We are the ones to advise them what to do, what not to do. The equivalence on the land, we are the ones to know where to find it. For instance, there are areas that one can, go to verify whether the land that the person wants to invest in is genuine or is actually owned by the person claiming to own it. For instance, if there's litigation on the land, for example, by approaching lawyer to find out if there's any equivalence, of course, there will be need for us to go to the court registry to find out whether there's a pending litigation. Because when you invest in a land, you buy land, and you now realize later there's the litigation on the land. There is what we call lex pendis in law, meaning that when there is a pending case in court, parties or anybody need to hold on to the decision of the court. So that will be an impediment for whatever the person wants to invest or want to do on the land. That's another aspect. The another aspect is that, for instance, there are some lands that are under acquisition under the Land Use Act, particularly Section 5 Sub 1 and Section 38 Sub 1 of the Land Use Act of 1978. The ownership of the land has been erased. Absolute ownership has been erased. What the law now stipulates is that all land transaction, all land in every state or federation is vested, not belong. You can't use the word belong. What the law says is that it is vested in the hand of the governor of that state. What that means is that the governor is to hold that land in trust for the government, for the people. Are you getting me now? Meaning that the absolute ownership is no longer there. Yeah. What we now have is a possessory ownership, in quotes. Possession subject to a condition.
So in a case where someone has gone as far as acquiring a land where there's something like this in place, yes. I know there are cases like that where you bought this land, you didn't know, several years later the government is coming to construct a road through the same land. What can one do in such situation?
Well, that's the popular saying, ignorance of the law is not an excuse. That is why I want to commend this particular station for bringing this awareness to the people. We need to educate people. Ignorance of the law, as I said, is not an excuse, but by and large, for every wrong, there must be a remedy.
Okay.
Now, in a situation whereby the land has been bought, and later the buyer now realizes that it falls under acquisition, what the person can do is to approach the land registry to start the processing of buying the land directly from the government. In some instances, usually, the government usually ratify such sales, especially when the land acquired is not designated for a special purpose. For instance, in some cases, some lands are reserved for conservation purpose, for aquatic purposes, even for historical purposes.
And there's some land that should not be sold.
Exactly, because of the
either the topography.
Exactly, and for the purpose of environment. So aside this, if this land does not fall under these areas I've mentioned, the government usually ratify the sale. There are processes that one can pass through.
Okay, now let's bring our conversation down to the agreements. Yes. It's the transfer of ownership now from the buyer, from the seller to the buyer. Yes. And this cannot happen if there's no legal document. So let's talk about the agreements now. Who writes an agreement? Is it the buyer, the seller, or the lawyer of the buyer?
No.
And can a seller have a lawyer as well, or is it just the person coming to buy that comes with a lawyer?
As I've said it earlier, in any transaction that we want to get ourselves involved in, we need legal practitioners. Why am I saying this is that we need to be well guided. As I said, ignorance of the law is not an excuse. In a situation like that, for the purpose of saving one's money, so that you will not be paying from two sides, one lawyer will suffice, because the land transaction specifically stipulated that land instruments to be prepared and to be executed by parties must be done prepared by a lawyer. The implication of that is that any legal instrument not prepared by a lawyer, aside the fact that the person that prepares it, that is not a lawyer, has committed an offense under the law, aside that fact, such documents will not be registrable.
But how many of us, how many Nigerians know these things? Because you go to the villages, indigenous people are selling their lands, you know. In fact, there are cases where indigenous people just sold their land to foreigners or strangers who've, had cohabit in that particular settlement, and say the children of those that particular place come home, and there's this clash between the person who sold. It has happened before. The uncle of a particular family sold this land, and the children whose father is the owner of the land came back, and they tried to get their land back, but it was becoming an issue. So how many people are aware of this particular part where
because of the society we find ourselves, there are vast breach of gap between the rural settlements and cosmopolitan settlements. So be that as it may, issue of trust is involved here. In a metropole whereby all things are happening, we need to put into consideration that such transaction must be in writing. That's why the law is there to protect individual. Unlike in the rural areas, there is a trust. Even the law recognizes customary sale. Are you getting me now? So even if the transaction is done without even putting something down, at the long run, we still need to put it as a proper way the law has put it. So that's why it is now the duty of all stakeholders, we lawyers, the government, and some other agencies to educate people more. And as a matter of fact, the literacy in our society is getting higher. So the issue that people don't know is not usually arise.
What of the issue of people buying, being played? In the case of acquiring a land, you bought a land from this person, but the person you bought is not the owner of the land. And then the real owner came, and it's just something similar. But in this case now, it's not even in the village setting now, even in urban setting, you see people tell you, in fact, it's most common with real estate people now. Yes. Real estates, they sell lands that are not theirs, and then the owner of the land comes and Do you think this is also a problem with the person buying it, or?
It is. As I said earlier, that before anybody can think of buying or paying for the land it's interested in, you must first of all conduct due diligence. Due diligence I was referring to means that you must investigate, do your thorough investigation. Let's take for instance, there are ways of acquiring land. It can be by way of gifts. It can be by way of inheritance. It can be a way of purchase. You can purchase it. It can even be by way of lease. You can acquire land by lease. Now, in the aspect of inheritance, you must conduct investigation whether the person selling owns that land jointly or he owns it exclusively, in quotes. Are you getting that? In a situation whereby 4 persons inherited a land, a plot of land, 1 person cannot sell it.
At all.
That is what the law says. It therefore means that the head of the family cannot single-handedly sell the family land without the consent of other members of the family, especially principal members. In Yoruba lineage, we call it Idigi. They must be involved. In a situation whereby a head of the family sells land without consent of other principal members of the family, the court has declared it to be void ab initio. No, it's to be voidable. Voidable, that's how long law describes it. But when some principal members of the family sell family land without the consent of the family head, the law states that it is void ab initio, meaning that at both sides, the consent must be there. So it is now depends on individual now to find out. You can make inquiry through the owners of adjacent land. If it's a village, you can approach village heads. If it's a compound, you can just approach anybody. Independent investigation. And we must not rush to do this. Aside conducting a search from the registry that I've mentioned earlier, we can also approach individual community leaders
one-on-one
to find out whether the person that is presenting himself to be the owner actually owns the said land. So that is now what will come to play. After all this must have been done and conducted, then the transaction, the execution of the land instrument will now be done.
So from all you've said now, there's no way a real estate agent is taking the place of a lawyer in terms of acquiring land.
The role of each estate agent and lawyer, they are interwoven. Let me take this as an example. There are some professional people like surveyor. They have vital role to play in land transaction, because when you want to buy land, you must also consider whether the land has some documents. Let's take for instance, there is a survey plan on the land that is given. In that regard, there must be the person would need the service of surveyor to confirm whether that survey plan actually speaks about the land in question. That would take us to coordinate of the survey plan. It is the surveyor that will determine through their own training and expertise. They will tell us that going by the coordinate on this survey plan, the land here that we want to buy, the coordinate is saying that it's not there. Are you getting me now? So estate valuers as well, they are the ones to tell us the value, the present economic value of the land, so that the vendor will not oversell, so to say, and the buyer, prospecting buyer, will not be cheated. Now, the role of lawyer will come into play to perfect the land document.
But how do you really put that into play? Because before you go further, they say land appreciates. The value of land 5 years ago is not the value of land today.
Yes. The professional will determine the actual price.
The
current price. The professionals will do that. Even if you don't want to engage professionals, you can even make independent inquiry from people that just buy, and you compare. Are you getting me now? But it is advisable, no matter, it depends on the bargaining power. It's not all these professionals that you engage that will bill you more than necessary. Are you getting me now? We are saying this so that everything will be perfect. You are considering perfect society, perfect economic transaction. That is why we are there.
I'm looking at this now and I'm trying to understand. say you're getting a small piece of land and you're employing the services of a lawyer, an agent, a surveyor. You know, how is this even balanced for a person trying to acquire a little piece of land? Again, I'm still going to bring you back to the question of, is this relatable to any size of land you want to get, or it has to be something big?
Yes, it is. The way in practice, most people don't consider all these professionals. Are you getting me now? We deal with them every day because of the way our society is, but in a very, you know, it depends on even the land in question. Are you getting me now? When you have a land that is more valuable, the size is not an issue. Value placed on the land will determine how the transaction will go. Because you have seen a situation whereby just an half plot of land, they price it 1 billion naira. It happens. It depends on the value. So you don't expect somebody that wants to buy 1 billion naira.
But a land that has no value a few years ago.
There's no land that has no value. That is it. Yes. We are talking now. Land, you know, moment the land is sold, the moment the land is acquired, it starts appreciating. Land is so significant that, you know, it's not just a car. It won't damage, except there is a disaster, natural disaster. The value, it's appreciated every day.
All right. Let's go on this break, after which the program continues. Please stay with us. Welcome back. You're still watching You and the Law on OJTV. Today we're taking a close look at buying land and the legal requirements in Nigeria. We still have our guest with us on the program, Nasir Moshood, and he's been taking us through the basis for getting a landed property in Nigeria. So before we went on that break, you told us that you could acquire lands through different means, by gifts, either lease. Let's talk about lease now. You know, some people just, in fact, is now a common thing about around real estate agents now. Buy a land and pay gradually. You know that part where you buy on credit and then you pay like in the short period of time. Now let's bring this down to the documents required in acquiring a land. Before an agent will go to the extent of giving you a landed property without you paying, you have to some extent present some documents, and on the underside you also have. So what are those documents that one would come across in acquiring a land in Nigeria? Now,
going by the trend now, whereby we have different companies, making adverts here and there, inviting people to buy land and be paying gradually. This is a common trend, and people need to be very, very careful. First of all, they need to study thoroughly the document they are signing, because it is usually contract of sale. It will stipulate the mode of payment, how the money will be paid, and there is usually a clause that one needs to be very careful with. Oftentimes, the company usually put a clause that if you don't pay at a particular time, that's all.
The land becomes theirs.
And ignorantly, people just sign such documents. So in such situation, the same due diligence I've mentioned of buying proper is what we need to also conduct in this regard. Are you getting me now? After you must have confirmed the authenticity of the said land, then whatever document you want to sign before payment, you can request for the advance copy so that your lawyer will be involved. We will explain in details what this means to you. It is when you're now comfortable, you are satisfied that all the terms have been duly explained to you, then you now go with such transaction. Are you getting me?
So let's talk about proof of land ownership.
Yes.
When all of this has been made, how is this document like? What does it look like that you are now the owner of the land?
The law stipulates deed. In legal circle, we call it land instruments. The lawyer will prepare deed. We can tag it deed of conveyance or deed of assignment.
Who writes that?
The lawyer. It is the lawyer that prepares it. So the necessary information required, the names of the seller, names of the buyer, address of both parties,
witnesses,
how that the seller, we call it vendor, how it derives his title, whether by inheritance, whether by lease.
The title now is the land?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
How he got the title, whether he inherited it, he was given, it must be detailed in that deed. So then attestation clause, receipt clause must be included, then the execution clause. The execution means both parties must have signed and exchanged it. It is when that is done that the transaction has been finalized. Afterwards, the land instrument will now then be taken to the appropriate agencies for certification. For instance, if the deed is a registrable instrument, it must be taken to the Internal Revenue of the state for the necessary payments to be done on it.
All right, as we wrap up on the program, let me quickly remind our viewers that you can reach us via our social media handles, or you can send in messages via the number displayed on the screen if you have questions or would want to relate to the legal practitioners that are on board with us on the program. Now, as we wrap up on this program, there are cases, we've seen it. Some of us have even had to partake in it where, you know, the land that you acquired, you didn't know there was a particular thing wrong with the land, and at the end of the day it turns haywire. So what are the necessary steps one can follow to rectify an issue that comes with acquiring a land?
Summarily, if there is a crime involved, the person concerned, the victim, should not hesitate to report the matter to the police. And if it is just a land dispute which is purely civil in nature, before going to court, they should try to use alternative dispute resolution mechanisms in resolving the differences. Because land litigation in the country is becoming, cumbersome. And you can't, as a lawyer, as a legal practitioner, as a custodian of justice, you need to let the people know that everything is not just going to court. You have to consider economic reality, pause, the danger involved, and even the stress involved. So by doing that, I think it's going to be a win-win situation. Oh,
so this is by the way, do you enjoy land matters? Because I know they can be very stressful.
I'm a litigation lawyer. We enjoy it.
You enjoy it.
But we try as much as possible to encourage our clients to do alternative dispute resolution. And that's what our legal system is, positions towards now.
Well, this is how far we can go on the program today. Thank you for watching You and the Law this week, and I believe you've been able to gather one or two things for yourself. Don't forget you can reach us via our social media handles, and of course call the number displayed on the screen. Thank you so much for coming again on the program. I mean, it's been an amazing time with you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Keep doing the good works. I really hope someday we get this right in our country the proper way.
We hope so. Thank you.
All right, there you have it. Until I see you next week, my name is Miriam Usman. Have yourself a great weekend. And don't forget, you owe Nigeria to be a law-abiding citizen. Bye for now.